Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing. Can y'all hear me in the back?
Doesn't sound like it's on.
Continuing to test. Hey! Always be testing. All right. All right. Get ready for even more cringe. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to this talk today. As you can see, I brought gifts. I am pandering. I am not above that. And we're going to talk about READMEs today as a vessel for talking about some other stuff. So I want you all to close your eyes or keep them open and imagine a README file, any sort of primary documentation for a project. What's in that README file? What are you seeing? What feelings is it giving you? Think about the developer setup section. Is it good? Is it bad? What's good about it? What's bad about it? What's ugly about it? What makes you feel a sense of dread? I know what doesn't make me feel a sense of dread is gifts. Gifts are always useful in a README. I think every README needs at least 10 gifts. But there are other nice things in a README. Hyperlinks, documentation, very reasonable thing to have in there. One-liners, in order to get the project set up. So if it's an NPM library for Node, for JavaScript, nice to have a little one-liner to get it installed. Or for Go, or for Python, or the most intense one-liner of all time, the one-word make, which always felt very, very spooky, and I never really understood what it was doing, how one word could do all those things. All right, so that's the good. What doesn't make you feel so good in a README? To me, the stuff in a README that makes me a little bit uncomfortable is perfectly reasonable stuff like this. Make sure you have Python installed, version 3.4. I can do that, I can check. I probably do have it installed. Maybe I don't. Maybe my coworker doesn't. You just install it, that's fine. It's totally reasonable. Download an IDE extension, cool. It's nice that they're providing some help for the project. But like, do I have to disable it when I'm on other projects? And then when I come back from those other projects, do I have to remember to re-enable it? There's lots of things that I have to keep in my mental RAM as I go along here. Oh, if you're on this operating system, this tool is also available via these 3 or 4 or 5 different ways to install it. That's always fun because I don't know which one to choose. I just want to get this thing running. I just want to get the project working. So I pick one of them, maybe the one that I've used in the past, and my coworkers or my teammates choose different ones. And then we end up having different versions because that one didn't get updated, but this one did, but that's getting updated next week because they have this different cadence. So all of these, git pre-commit hooks too. I mean, those are awesome for enforcing the project conventions and for cleaning up code that's going in, but you gotta run a bash script to do it, and anything you gotta do with a bash script to get a project set up is always a little bit spooky, a little bit, is it idempotent? If I rerun it, is it gonna cause problems? I don't know. So I call these things the meh because they're not bad, right? Like they're helpful, they're well-intentioned, they just have a little bit of baggage with them. So what if we replaced some of those words with different words? What if you had to ensure that you had version 3.4 of Matplotlib? Why is the README telling me this? I can just install it via pip, right? I can do a one-liner. Where's my one-liner to install this thing? This is an unreasonable sentence to find in README. Do you all agree? Or is this, okay, thank you. How about instead of downloading an IDE extension from a URL, the README told you to go to this hyperlink to get the code base. Why is that not in the Git repo? Why is not all of the code right here already? That is an unreasonable thing. That is a bad thing to find in a README, and I hope that none of you have ever been subjected to that. Or, okay, yeah, so when you're running like the CI/CD pipeline after you make your Git commits, just spin up Jenkins locally on your own MacBook. It'll be great. No, don't do that. How about, oh yeah, and then when you want to push it up to like QA and Canary and Dev, here's the instructions to get that Kubernetes cluster running locally on your laptop so you can get all that stuff done and then just push it up to production. All of these things would make your skin crawl if you found them in a README. But let's go back to the meh. Reasonable, unreasonable, reasonable, unreasonable. So to me, the ugliness is actually the sentence structure. I don't like that you are telling me to do a certain step, a certain set of actions in order to get the system configured properly. How are there not robots for this? We had robots for the NPM install, but not for PostgreSQL. Oh, well, there's, it depends on the package manager for your operating system. You gotta do this versus that. We'll just put it in a README doc. Ugh. I call this local as documentation, because in order to get your local environment configured properly, and therefore in order to write correct code, you need to follow these documentation steps. And we're not always great at maintaining documentation. We're not always great at writing it in a very helpful way. But even if we write it perfectly, I tried to write these sentences very, very properly and formally, but the words inherently have, they're loaded words. Make sure of this, download this, if you're on this, set up this. These words and these sentence structures I see as the core problem here. I think the problem does not lie with the maintainers, with the documentation authors. I think the problem lies in the ecosystem and the tooling and the conventions we have in the industry around manually configuring things by following a set of bullet points or a numbered list in a README file. Show of hands, who feels the same way? Okay, good to hear. Glad I'm not alone. So, I contend that some symptoms of this is onboarding taking forever. You join a project and you get your laptop and you're like, great, can I start coding? No, you have to install this, you gotta do this, oh, we forgot to add that to the documentation. You gotta do this. All developers on slightly different environments, we would not accept that for our QA cluster. We wouldn't accept that when this Git commit gets pushed up, it gets different treatment from this other Git commit. Why do we accept that this MacBook and this Windows laptop inherently have to have different environments that we're writing code in? It'll usually not cause problems, but it sometimes does. And those sometimes are very frustrating and they take a lot of time. And they waste time for that device maintenance, which is on each individual developer on your team. On a team of 2, who cares, right? It's not worth automating that way. But on a team of 20 or 200, or if you're an open source project where you want contributors to come along and be able to add a line of code because they think of a new feature and just add it as quickly as they thought of it, this setup and this maintenance stuff is really going to eat away at your productivity as a team. So, what about GitOps? GitOps is, as code. We have code to define everything that happens in the pipeline, everything of how it goes out to infrastructure and out to our users. And it all is on this glorious source Git repo to give us all of that. We can put all of our configuration files in that source code repo, and we can have everything after that defined as code, and our users will be happy. And every diagram I've ever seen of GitOps kind of only talks about this right hand of the screen. What about the left side? What about all the stuff that happens before? How is that not part of the software development lifecycle? What about our devices? What about that local environment that you're coding within? Because that's where a software engineer is going to be doing debugging to solve the problems, to figure out what line of code do I need to change and how do I need to change it. And this problem gets worse as your team grows and as your devices change. And yes, I ran out of emojis for different types of computers. So people that are coding on their iPhones are going to have a lot of trouble with this architecture. And fax machines are going to be in even more trouble. And they're all going to have slightly different local environments that they're writing these text. Let's just call it what it is. It's text. How is text editing this fractured? How is it this different? So my goal today is something that I'm calling localized code. No, I'm not trying to coin a phrase. I just think that it's useful for this talk. So do not tweet out hashtag localized code after this. I will not advocate for that. But if we had local as code, in the same way that we had pipeline and infrastructure as code, what could that do for us? A new developer coming onto the team, just immediately getting the exact same environment as the veteran that started the team? That's powerful. And everyone being able to, regardless of the device they're on, being able to edit code in the exact same environment with the same features, with the same powers, that's where I want to be on all the teams that I'm on. But how do you get there? That's the key. So let's look at the layers of what was bundled up into that little local emoji. We've got the source code for the repo. Source code is code. Done. Libraries. You're likely using a declarative package manager. Most programming languages these days, Node, NPM, Python, Pip, Go, modules, whatever that's called. Most likely Cargo is really great in Rust. Like, you have this declarative package manager where you do a one-liner, or you do a two-liner maybe, and your environment has all of those dependencies. That's thousands of lines of code pulled down and installed exactly where they need to be productive. Awesome. What about the packages? And when I say packages, I mean the stuff that's assumed it's already installed on your computer, or it's those steps in the README. It's saying, oh yeah, you need to make sure that Python 3.4 is there. You can't click install Python, ha ha ha. Well, what about curl? It assumes curl is installed in your system. Maybe there's a little command where it says do a VI or do a nano, and then they have to put a parenthetical like, oh, if you don't have VI or nano, do this other thing. So all of this stuff is currently as documentation. And of course, the operating system is documentation, right? Like, how can you have an operating system as code? That's ridiculous. No, you need to make sure that you get a laptop and set up the operating system and then talk to us after that. So let's look at a tool that I wish was more popular. It's called Nix. Who here has heard of it? One person's heard of it. I get to tell all of you about Nix. Nix is a package manager for every operating system except Windows. I wish it did have Windows. But for Linux and Mac operating systems, this will work. If you're on Ubuntu, you normally use APT, you can use Nix. If you're on Fedora or RHEL, you might use Yum. You can use Nix. It's a package manager that will work across these operating systems, and I do believe in them to get Windows support within a year or so. I think that's their goal. Their goal is to be a cross-platform package manager. And more than that, you can see here that when I cat out this shell.nix file, it is a declarative config file for what I want installed for this project only. I want Python 3.8 installed. And then when I run the nix shell command, it pops me into an interactive shell session where that tool is installed. I did not have Python installed on my MacBook, but I do have Python installed in the shell session. So imagine you're working on a project, and all you do in order to start coding on that project is run nix-shell. And then you're popped into a bash shell where you can do all of the coding you need, and maybe that bash shell is ferrying those packages or whatever to your IDE, so your IDE is talking to it, and the whole environment is ephemeral, it's declarative, it's immutable. All of this stuff is done via symlinks and installed in the /nix root directory, so you don't need to worry about conflicts between different projects anymore. Who thinks this sounds useful? Who thinks this sounds like it's a bit optimistic and a pipe dream? Very reasonable response. I hope that it gets to the point where it convinces you, and I hope that if you check it out, you are convinced. All right, how does this help us? It completely declaratively solves our package. No, it doesn't. They don't have all packages available on the Nix package manager. They probably never will, but it knocks out a lot of them. So if you're on a project like I joined this programming language project that was based in Rust. It is based in Rust and Zig. And I don't know how to code either of those programming languages. I am mainly a JavaScript developer and I come from Python. So I don't know how to set up Rust. I've never run cargo build in my life. I don't even know what Zig is. Apparently it's like a C replacement. That's scary to me. I don't want to set that up. I don't even want to follow a README to set that up that has a really nice guide. All I did was nix-shell because they had a shell.nix file in their GitHub repo. And immediately I was able to run the test suite and it passed on first try. And I was like, oh, I'm a Rust developer now. I got all these tools installed, they're perfectly configured. I mean, it felt really powerful because to get to that point, it's almost like that whole meme about Arch Linux users getting really battle-hardened after installing Arch because they went through that process of following the documentation. I normally feel battle-hardened after going through a Git repository's setup steps, where I'm like, I know what tools they're using. And to just get that out of the box with one liner feels a little bit like cheating, but I don't mind it. So, no, it can't declaratively solve all of our packages. If all of the packages that you need are in the Nix repository, by the way, they have an entire operating system that is based off of this so that you can have a single config file for your whole computer, for your whole operating system. Check out NixOS if you're interested. If you're not interested, do not go there. There be dragons. It is very spooky. All right, here's a different tool that takes a completely orthogonal approach to this. Has anybody heard of Docker before? Well, there's lots of IDEs that are building in support for Docker, where you can define a Docker image. You have that Docker file that you say all of the steps that you want to do. It's not declarative like that Nix config file was, but it's good enough, right? You do the imperative steps to get it going. There's layers for each of those steps. It's great. It's ephemeral, it's isolated, hermetically sealed off from the rest of your computer. That's a good environment to code. I would rather code in that environment than write on my operating system itself. And then here is Visual Studio Code showing you that you can just move its backend into that container. Like the app that's running on my computer, you can think of it as having a front end and a back end that normally are just glued together. And here it's like, oh, let's separate that back end, move it into the container. So therefore, anything I'm doing on the shell, any code that I'm editing is running in that container. And only the client side, GUI side, clicky stuff is on the front end of my operating system. I really like this because it gives me the same feeling as that nix-shell command without needing a spooky package manager in order to do it. Docker is very familiar. I feel comfortable with it. It's going to be supported for a long time. So this is a good solution if you want to Dockerize your GitHub repo or Dockerize your team's enterprise project, because now you don't need people to install the right versions of things on their operating system and deconflict them every time they switch from one directory to another. They can just switch between projects and the IDE takes care of it. So what does that do for us? It's a little bit strange. It injects an operating system into your operating system. There are 2 layers of packages now. There's your device operating system, which previously we were calling operating system, and that has packages that need to be installed. In order to accomplish this, you need Docker Desktop, you need the IDE installed, so say it's Visual Studio Code, you still need that stuff installed. So there's still some imperative README style steps that you need to go through in order to get that working. But hey, we've got some more green stuff on top. We've got the project operating system, which is whatever you want to put in that Docker image. Is it Alpine? Is it Ubuntu? You pick. Sure, whatever's best for your project. And then the packages, most of the stuff you need for your projects can be put in here. Because it's like almost any software you can install inside of the Docker container, especially for development environment stuff. It can go in there. You're not going to run into that nixable, non-nixable issue that we saw before. So like, say it's a Java project, Java can be installed inside of that Docker image and not actually on your operating system. I do not like having Java installed on my operating system because I never know what version it is, and that just scares me. Here's the third tool to check out. Chezmoi. Has anyone heard of this tool? Has anyone heard of dotfile managers? Has anyone heard of dotfiles? All right, dotfile managers manage your dotfiles. So all of those preference files and config files for the programs on your operating system, things like I want my bash aliases, or oh, I want my IDE to have this color theme or this font. All those sorts of like config files that have a period in front of their file name, call them dotfiles. The dotfile manager looks up at your dotfile repo, which maybe you put on GitHub or GitLab or somewhere, and then with a one-liner, it pulls those dotfiles down, resolves any differences. I've done a -- force here to just override it so I didn't actually have to display all the output of it saying, I'm going to do this. It's very helpful output, but no, not needed right now. And then it makes all of those things the right way on your operating system. Why am I bringing this up? This is not really about projects, but I contend that once you go the route of Dockerizing your projects, you're going to frustrate your developers because everyone's going to get the same homogeneous setup. You're going to be in this container. Where are my bash aliases? Where are my dot files? Where are my things? And that's going to cause friction, pushback from people on your team saying, this is a bad idea. This whole local as code thing is not working. It's frustrating me. Where are my workflows? I want my local as local. I don't like it being messed with in this way. But what they're really saying is I want my dot files, because almost anything they can do that they want to have pre-configured can be configured with a dot file. And if it's not technically a dot file manager can still move a file around on your operating system to get it somewhere. So personalization, I contend, is an important layer once you go this split operating system path, where you're going to push your developers into this strange new world that they haven't been into. It'll help make it a little bit more familiar. And we're done. Thank you for coming to the top. I'm just kidding. What about that red stuff at the bottom? That red stuff at the bottom is still an issue. It's not as bad as it used to be, because again, you really only need like Docker Desktop and whatever IDE installed on your operating system. But that still means a lot of things. One, it means that the code base needs to be downloaded onto your laptop. And for a team that's distributed around the world, that's a little bit uncomfortable if it happens. It's the norm, but that doesn't make it okay. Two, it means that you can't use any operating system. How about a Chromebook? Can you do this workflow on a Chromebook? No, because you can't install Docker Desktop on a Chromebook, at least not that I know of. Please let me know if I'm wrong on that. You can't use this workflow with just any operating system, and you can't use it right out of the box. Like you can't just open up the MacBook right out of the box and start coding, because you need to install Docker Desktop. And oh, by the way, if your team is over, what is it, 500 people now, you need a license for Docker Desktop. So if you don't want to pay that licensing fee, this workflow doesn't work for you. So these red boxes still hold some weight, and we still want to get rid of them. One way to get rid of them, oh, sorry, I didn't ask the question. What if we didn't need to run the containers here? How do we get rid of that layer? Because if we didn't need to run containers locally, we might not need to have any requirements on the operating system at all. And because we've containerized everything from the green up, we can now separate these out because containers are portable and can be run anywhere, and you can run that on someone else's computer and connect to it from yours using the power of the cloud. I mean, you can run these anywhere, right? The cloud is like ideal for this. So what if you could run that IDE in a container with all those packages installed just the way that you wanted them, in the cloud somewhere, and then stream it to you somehow. And then you open up a web browser. Because I don't think a web browser really counts as an operating system package. I think it's considered primitive now for operating systems to come pre-installed with them. So if you can code in a web browser, you can basically code on any device. If you can log into that session using whatever your SSO or identity solution is, you can basically code from anywhere. You could go to a library computer and work on sensitive IP for your company, and none of it would be touching the hardware, none of it would be weirdly configured, all of your aliases and shortcuts would all be right where you left them. That's what something called Selkies does. Selkies is an open source project that I am co-maintaining with some people on my team at Itopia. It was invented at Google and open sourced out, and what it is it's a Kubernetes operator for stateful workloads like IDEs, like video games, like any sort of daily driver main app that you're doing photo editing or graphics editing in. Those sorts of sessions are historically kind of hard to run in Kubernetes and expose to end users and get them connected to the session. All the networking stuff, this solves that. All of the scaling stuff, this solves that. So what this essentially gives us is IDE in a browser. Now, there is a caveat to that, which is that we've just introduced Kubernetes. I sort of just snuck that in there. I was like, oh, well, of course you need Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a beast to manage, and if you don't have anyone on your team with expertise in that, that is not a good recommendation. I am not recommending that your team learns Kubernetes in order to get that last little sliver of red eliminated. Now, if that's the choice that you're making, I recommend just sticking with that little sliver of red because it's not that bad, right? We got a lot of the imperative stuff and the documentation-based stuff gone and got the local as code in for most of the stack. But if you're looking to set up a large system for a lot of users, where you want those per user sessions and stateful workloads to be connected through a web browser, check out Selkies, selkies.io or Selkies project on GitHub. It is a really cool Kubernetes operator, and if you have any questions about use cases, hit me up after or join us on the Discord and we can talk about it there. Now, let's summarize. Remote is the new local is something that I've heard to describe like remote work, like people not coming into the office after COVID, but I think that it can be equally well applied here. Your local development environment, you can make it remote and get these benefits of code from any device, of SSO-based onboarding and offboarding, and it only takes minutes to onboard someone regardless of where they are in the world, because all they need is that web browser to connect into it. The identical setups is huge. It does not matter what operating system you're running. It does not matter what packages you have installed locally. Everyone's going to get the exact same development experience. And you can even give that development experience to someone that's just hopping in for 5 minutes to contribute to your team, and then they're gone. You set them up and tear them down, you're good to go. And maintenance is completely eliminated on the device side. It's been shifted to the cloud side and shifted to the shared collaboration side, which is really useful because that means that developers can help each other keep that shared environment maintained. In the same way that you wouldn't expect everyone to maintain their own version of the QA environment or their own version of the production infrastructure, that's a shared load that the team is supposed to share the burden of. And similarly, they can share the burden of configuring this environment. Oh, hey, do we want to bump my patch version of Python? Oh no, I'm not ready yet, I'm still working on this thing. Okay, I'll bump it, I'll submit a pull request and you can merge it when you're ready. Okay, thanks. Merged, deployed, automatically Python updates in your environment. That's localized code. That's taking that GitOps approach and using it to solve these local problems that we have. A bonus is that that source code never actually touches your laptop. And that is so the norm that the entire code base is downloaded that I think that the industry has become kind of blind to that as a security factor. I mean, it is a serious concern that makes companies do things like buy fresh laptops and not let developers bring their own device. Makes them configure them and do some remote administration and access stuff, network monitoring, see what websites your developers are accessing from their home office. Like, come on, that's awful. Or it makes you put them into a VDI session because you want to have that lockdown and you want to have those security guarantees. And then VDI is not the same thing as this localized code through a web browser that we were experiencing. It's not focused on the developer, it's focused on the network firewalls and preventing anything from getting out with no concern as to your muscle memory or workflow. So I contend that this is something that we should see more of in the industry, of making sure that when you have sensitive intellectual property, you have control over that on a network basis and on a tooling basis, a stack basis, rather than a, hey, can you send us back the laptop when you're done basis. And because of all that, I want to do a quick pitch for what my company is doing. We are Itopia. We're making something called Itopia Spaces. It's essentially a managed version of what I just described. So you don't have to set up the Kubernetes stack. You don't have to set up Selkies. You can bring your own IDE. You'll have the administrative interface to be able to monitor what your developers are doing. And you can also give them new environments, have your developers contribute to it in a GitOps style flow, all on a consumption model. So it's all software as a service. None of this is running on-prem or in your cloud project or anything. So if you're interested, you can check it out. You've got a free trial. I think that it allows you to do a lot of things and to scale up and out in a lot of directions for your environments and to take this localized code to a whole nother level. So I want to leave, it looks like 4 minutes for questions and answers. Any questions?
I had like a spirited argument with my partner, who is also a developer, about this. And he's like, what if there is no internet? How do you do your job?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the what if there is no internet is
and that's like his biggest qualm with this, is he's like, if my internet goes out, what do we do?
It's true. Yeah, having the offline mode supported, so something like, that's a choice to make, right? Like the choice to never have the code touch the laptops is a choice that comes with that trade-off of, therefore you are completely sensitive to networking concerns. But something like Selkies or something like that remote development environment, it doesn't mean that everything has to be remote. It's kind of a sliding scale. You could have it be similar to how VS Code, when it was doing that local Docker development, it had that backend split where the backend is in the container and the front end is on your device. What it's doing is it's streaming source code back and forth over that wire. And you can have that offline caching on the front end if you want that. And that's something that is, I think, a decision that should be left up to administrators rather than left up to like the whims of the development team of what tools they choose.
You're saying it shouldn't be YOLO.
Yeah, it shouldn't be YOLO, absolutely not. But if you've got a development team that all has a steady internet connection, or you have like a team of 100 where you're robust against that, you have redundancies, then maybe you can make that decision to say, hey, all the source code should just stay in the cloud, never touch their devices, and network interruptions be damned, essentially.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Yes?
Have you thought through what it would look like for like embedded development, like using WebUSB or something like that?
Yeah, we are really looking forward to WebUSB. If anyone's not familiar with it, there's a USB spec coming out for web APIs, so that would enable websites to be able to talk to USB devices that are plugged into the laptop that is running that web browser. That sounds really cool. That also sounds like you would be able to do hardware development for like a microcontroller or something that you need to plug into your development laptop without needing to have all of the drivers and the entire development environment for that device installed on that machine. Like imagine using a Chromebook to program FPGA. Like, that's awesome to me, to think that you can have that flexibility. Was there something you had in mind for the embedded development?
Nope, I'm just curious on what your thoughts are.
Yeah.
I've been toying around with it for a while, so I was looking for insight.
Yeah, I see it as like the way that version control systems are going, where there's more and more features added to GitHub every day and to GitLab every day, and more of our work is being done in the web browser. I think things like WebUSB are going to find a lot of features and integrations. So like whether that's, I don't know, Google Docs, what are they going to do with WebUSB spec? I feel like there's a lot of potential once you can have the web standards that are growing and becoming more commonplace. reach out from the computer essentially and start to be able to be like a command center for that hardware that's around us. I think right now, like hardware drivers and accessories, Windows has a bit of a monopoly on those, and Linux has always been a little bit strange, and the web never has an answer for it. So I'm hoping that that can be a pathway for the more open source ecosystems to have a say, and the more web-based, remote-based ecosystems to have a say in how you can do that local hardware development. Any last question before we hit the 30-minute mark? Cool. Well, if you want to get in touch with me, my name is Jan. You can hit me up at JanCVanB on some social networks. Check out the Selkies project on GitHub and Discord, and Itopia Spaces. If you're curious about what it can do for you, we have a booth over in that direction by breakout room 3, and we can talk to you further. Thank you very much.